This episode is brought to you by Iams Pet Food. When you choose Iams dry dog or cat food, you can see a difference in your pet with your own eyes. Healthy energy in 5 days, healthy digestion in 10 days, and healthy skin and coat in just 25 days. Satisfaction for you and them. Guaranteed or your money back. Feed Iams dry dog or cat food and see a visible difference. Visit iams.com/difference to learn more.
Ryan Reynolds here for Mint Mobile. One of the perks about having 4 kids that you know about is actually getting a direct line to the big man up north. And this year, he wants you to know the best gift that you can give someone is the gift of Mint Mobile's unlimited wireless for $15 a month. Now, you don't even need to wrap it. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment required, equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes on unlimited. See mintmobile.com for details.
It is Monday, December the 23rd, 2024. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen, Slate's sports podcast. Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, Happy New Year, Happy Holidays to all listening. Back with you again, I'm Alex Kirshner. I'm a contributing writer for Slate, and I'm the co-host of the college football podcast Split Zone Duo. We have a great show for you this week, albeit one that will start somberly as we talk through the legacy of the late Rickey Henderson, who died last week. We will then talk about the rising tide of NCAA volleyball and a ballpark funding mess that is unfolding in Florida. As usual, joining me this week is Lindsay Gibbs, the founder and proprietor of Power Plays, a newsletter that covers the biggest stories of the day in women's sports. Hey, Lindsay.
Hi, I'm here on a Juju Watkins high. I'm feeling unstoppable.
And of course, we have Ben Lindbergh with us. Ben is a senior editor for The Ringer, and he co-hosts the Effectively Wild podcast on the world of baseball. Ben, how are you?
Well, I spent part of my weekend writing about Rickey Henderson's death, which was less ideal. But on the positive side, I got to watch a lot of Rickey Henderson highlights, which is maybe the nice thing. The silver lining when we lose a great is that we get to reappreciate their greatness. And as a fellow Christmas baby like Rickey, I'm particularly attached to him. He will always be the greatest player born on my birthday.
Yes, something that you wrote about eloquently at The Ringer this week.
Thank you.
Agreed. And hint, hint, everyone. Ben wants happy birthday messages.
Yeah, I'm really putting it out there in all the media.
Subtle.
Yeah.
It's subtle.
Before we get into our show in full, as always, we want to say thank you to our Slate Plus members for making this show possible. One method of saying thanks is with a bonus episode. This week, we will talk about a Hallmark movie and a Lifetime movie that you probably haven't seen but may have heard about. Oh boy, oh boy. You can hear that episode right now, as long as you're a Slate Plus member. Subscribe by going to Apple Podcasts and clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangupplus to get access wherever you listen. As we've already talked about on this show, Rickey Henderson died last Friday, a few days before his 66th birthday. Henderson is a unique player in the great big history of baseball. He stole 1,406 bases during a 25-year career, 49% more than the stolen base total of second place Lou Brock. I don't declare any record unbreakable, and baseball's recent moves to limit pickoff attempts and expand the size of bases may yet contribute to Henderson one day getting caught. But damn it, it's going to take a lot for that to happen. The leading active base stealer, 35-year-old Starling Marte, is all of 25% of the way to Henderson's total. Henderson is the definitive player in the history of the Oakland Athletics, a club that had him for parts of 14 seasons and got most of his best ones. The New York Yankees also had some great ones with Henderson. He has a bust in Cooperstown at the Baseball Hall of Fame, and it's worth saying here that Henderson was by no means just a base stealer. You cannot steal first base, as the saying goes, and Henderson led the majors with a .439 on-base percentage in 1990 and kept up a ridiculous .401 mark over that long of a career. Quite literally, they don't make him like Rickey anymore. He is an immense loss, and Ben, you wrote quite well about his legacy at The Ringer. You said that he is hyperbole-proof. Tell me what you meant by that.
Well, we will test that contention in this segment probably, but basically just that he was known for pumping himself up and talking about his own accolades and exploits as a player. And it was difficult, I think, for even him to exaggerate how valuable a player he was, and for us to do that, even though we talk about the many records that he broke and continues to hold and what an all-time inner circle type player he was. I think he's actually underrated, which is somewhat surprising because you'd think that a guy who had such a big personality was just a big star in every sense of the word, and also just has some of the most visible records in baseball history. He had by far the most stolen bases. He scored the most runs. You would think that that would not go under the radar. And of course, he was not a low profile player. But as I was writing about him, as I was re-examining the stats, I was just struck by how much better he was really than people gave him credit for at the time. And I think in a lot of ways, we now appreciate him more than he was appreciated in his time, in part because he was the type of player that we are now maybe better able to quantify than could be done in his day. So even though he was highly decorated, he won an MVP award, he won a Gold Glove, he was a 10-time All-Star, all of those numbers should have been considerably higher given everything he accomplished.
That Rickey Henderson is hyperbole proof. The first thing that jumps to my mind is the unbreakable record label. There are a lot of records in sports that are generally considered unbreakable, but sometimes they get broken.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Wayne Gretzky's goal scored record in the NHL is likely soon to be broken by Alex Ovechkin, something that people thought would never happen. There are plenty of track and field sprinting records that people thought would never be broken. It seems that if Rickey is ever caught in the stolen base department, that will be attributable to baseball changing the rules in a way to explicitly encourage stolen bases. I think without that, nobody would ever even get into his stratosphere in that area.
Yeah, no one ever has, certainly. And I think there's an effort to essentially re-engineer Rickey Henderson, or at least the era of Rickey Henderson. In fact, MLB Commissioner Rob Manfred explicitly acknowledged that in his statement on Henderson's passing and said that Henderson's era inspired the recent rules changes. And even so, no one comes close to sniffing the stratosphere of base stealing that Henderson did during his day, because he was a total outlier. He didn't invent base stealing, even high volume base stealing, but he took it to entirely a new level, not just on a single season basis, but career wise. And I think this was the most mind blowing stat that I had in my article, was just about the fact that if you divide the base stealing leaders under 30 years old and 30 and over, it's entirely different lists, except for Rickey Henderson, who is number one on both of those leaderboards. Everyone else turns over because, A, if you're a big base stealer, maybe it takes you time to get established and refine your technique and become a good enough offensive player that you're on base enough to steal prolifically. Or if you steal a lot early in your career, you wear down because that really takes a toll. And there's a lot of wear and tear that goes along with all of those headfirst slides that Rickey had. And yet he was so durable that he played professionally for 30 seasons, in the majors for 25 seasons, and would have kept going a lot longer if teams had let him. And so no one can catch that, I don't think. He had this unique durability and ability. And these days, of course, even if you change the rules, teams aren't going to let guys go like that. And there's some sense in that, because there's a certain point beyond which stealing bases doesn't really make that much sense analytically, even above all of the stuff that I was just talking about with the wear and tear and the injury risk. And so you're never going to get that kind of base stealing, barring really more dramatic rules changes. And so there's only been one Rickey Henderson, and there will only ever be one Rickey Henderson. And so you just sort of have to appreciate that he was able to be such an incredible outlier for so long.
Lindsay, one of the incredible things about Rickey Henderson that has come to my attention just in the last couple of days is also the way that he, in a way that isn't necessarily derogatory, has been misrepresented. At one of his crowning achievements, I think Rickey Henderson has been thought of by a lot of younger baseball fans as sort of this brash superstar over the years, largely because of a speech that he gave after he broke the stolen bases record, where one specific soundbite where he says, "Today I'm the greatest of all time, thank you," has gotten most of the publicity. Something that came to my attention from a lot of the obituary writing of Rickey over the last few days was that that was part of a much longer speech where he thanked tons of people that you would have never even thought would have made it into a public sentiment like that. And it made me think of all of the Bay Area baseball fans who have shared their experiences with Rickey Henderson over the last few days. Apparently just an unbelievably gracious guy when you would see him at a ballpark, see him in the community. And I almost feel ashamed of myself that I thought Rickey Henderson was sort of this braggadocious, not that he didn't deserve to be, very proud and kind of above it all figure, when in reality it seems like he was really humble, really like valued being part of the Oakland baseball community, the New York baseball community, in a way that I didn't even realize, and that, you know, by rights he didn't have to be.
Absolutely. You know, I am not going to sit here and pretend like I was a great connoisseur of Rickey Henderson's career and that I knew a whole lot about him beyond kind of the larger than life caricature that is out there. And it's just a testament to how well-rounded people are. And I think what's great about Rickey is you have to have so much self-belief to become a professional athlete, even a bad one, right? Like even a professional athlete on the low rungs, let alone, you know, to reach the heights that he did. That doesn't mean you don't have self-doubt too. Every single person has self-doubt. There's no amount of, you know, self-love and ego that, you know, will drown out all self-doubt. But I think that what's special is Rickey didn't ever try to hide it. He didn't ever try to pretend like that wasn't a part of what made him great and what made him special. And I love that. I can really embrace that in a person. And to speak to what you're talking about, Alex, as far as his humility, you know, I was reading what Dave Stewart, one of his best friends and teammates, and, you know, they grew up together, of course, Oakland A's legend, what he told Bob Nightingale of USA Today. He said for Rickey, I guess he wasn't really surprised when he found out he had pneumonia and had kind of gotten himself sick and had passed away. He said, quote, him having asthma, him being sick, it never stopped him. He was always on the go. He had these rental properties in Oakland, and I'd get these calls saying they saw Rickey out cutting the grass. I'd say, what do you mean? They told me he actually was out there with a lawnmower doing work on his property. He was always go, go, go. He loves to fish. He just took up hunting. On his first hunt, he's out there hunting wild boar. That's not the animal you hunt on your first hunt. But that was who Rickey was. And so it seems like this personality, it was just true to who he was, to his core. There was no faking it. It was very genuine. And that's what I'm drawn to in people, and especially in athletes, is a sense of sincerity, even if that comes in the form of brashness and ego and bragging.
Yeah, I learned that lesson about wild boar from Game of Thrones, R.I.P. Robert Baratheon. But really, I think he just was a player who was a better fit for today than he was for his day. Although I made the case in my piece that he helped turn his day into today by being who he was, by sort of normalizing his behavior. Because partly I'm talking about his game on the field where, you know, he played in a batting average first era and his high on base percentages weren't appreciated the way that they would be today. He is still the all-time unintentional walks leader. And also the fact that he combined power and patience and on-base ability in a way that leadoff hitters often do today. He still holds that record, too, for leadoff homers to start a game. And so he really did it all in a way that leadoff hitters in that era typically didn't. It was more of a get on base, be speedy, slap the ball around, whereas he could go deep too. And that was a big part of why he was able to get on base so consistently, is that pitchers had to respect his power. And so they had to pitch carefully to him. And when they did, he'd crouch over, he'd have his tiny strike zone, and he wouldn't chase. And then suddenly he'd be on first base. And then before you knew it, he might be on second or third. So it's partly that, but it's also partly the attitude. Just the fact that, yeah, he didn't lack for self-confidence, and justifiably so. He had an ego, but he could back it up. And also off the field was seemingly a good guy and humble and would do a lot of kind acts. But I think the ways in which he was sort of self-aggrandizing, or, you know, that he would stunt a little, that he'd do some home run pimping, that stuff today is almost the norm. Whereas back then it was seen as some sort of transgression. Now it's authenticity, it's sincerity. It's, oh, we're showing emotion. This is what we want baseball players to break out of this box of always being buttoned up or buttoned down. We want them to show some life out there. And Rickey was kind of the king of that. And when he would take a day off because he was feeling 70% or something, well, now that's much more acceptable too. We're kind of in this lens of load management era where you look at occasional days off and you don't say, oh, this guy's dogging it, he's slacking. You're saying, no, he's looking at the bigger picture for a guy who's going to play for 25 years and steal so many bases. Okay, every now and then you need a bit of a breather, right? And even one thing that he often was criticized for was caring about money and advocating for himself and wanting to make what he was worth. And he would sort of perennially hold out, and he'd be blasted by the baseball media at the time. Now, there were occasions where he would say sign a contract and then someone else would sign a bigger one, and he would want to tear up his old one so that he could be the highest paid player. He might still come in for criticism for something like that, but really wanting to be paid what he was worth, you have a much more pro-labor baseball media and sports writing base these days, and to some extent fan base, that I think would respect that and even advocate for it to some extent. So I really think in retrospect, his value as a player and also as a person and as an entertainer are better appreciated now than they were then. And I think if he were playing now, he'd make all the All-Star teams. He would have won 3 MVPs. He would have been on the All-Century team. He would have won a few Gold Gloves. I think he deserved all of those things.
Ben, I'm wondering how this is a very obvious and probably oversimplified question, but once again, as someone who did not watch all of this in real time, there's so much hand-wringing these days, and understandably so, about the lack of Black American baseball players. And I'm wondering, you know, the talk of his ego and money and greed, and, you know, those are a lot of negative stereotypes that are often associated with Black athletes. And these days, Black athletes in the United States are much more likely to go into football or into basketball. And I guess I'm just wondering how race, and, you know, during that time, he wasn't Jackie Robinson's type of barrier breaker necessarily, but how race played a role in how he was covered and perceived.
I definitely think there was a racial component to that, and that he would get labeled as selfish or, you know, not a team first player or lazy or all of these things that I think you'd see a white player a little less likely to be labeled with at that time or even today. And again, he was not the first. You could certainly say Reggie Jackson faced similar kinds of criticism for similar reasons. And he was an Oakland A's legend who preceded Rickey there. And both were sort of seen as brash and divisive and could sometimes rub people the wrong way, but were also incredible players. And so that is certainly something that came up during Rickey's career and has been discussed at length since it. And yes, I think that's another reason why MLB looks at Rickey Henderson's career in that era and says, can we bring that back? And the league has made some investments to try to boost African-American participation in the game. And hopefully those will pay some dividends. But as I noted in my piece, I think there's a good chance that Rickey Henderson, if he or someone like him came along today, would be a football player, because football was his first love and he excelled at football and he was persuaded to play baseball. And, you know, some things haven't changed. His mother was worried about him having a lot of head injuries and thought baseball would be maybe safer for him and that he would have a longer career. I think it's hard to argue that she was right about the longer career part. But really, I think there would be some headwinds there. There were a lot of incredible Black players of that era, even in the Oakland area, who all kind of came up together and played against each other and excelled in the majors around the same time. And that is another thing that is a little lacking from today's game. So you can make investments, you can make rules changes, you can try to bring that excitement back, but it does really hammer home just how incredibly entertaining he was and how few players like that there are, that you can't just say, oh yeah, here's another player who is exactly like Rickey Henderson. It's kind of overused probably to say that someone is a unicorn or that he's one of one, but in Rickey's case, I can't dispute it.
And last thing on Rickey,
Yeah.
You just mentioned the Oakland area and the players that came up out of there. I think few players are so closely identified with one team and one fan base as Rickey Henderson is with the Oakland A's, who of course are relocating this upcoming season to a minor league park in Sacramento. What a travesty it is. There were a lot of great players who played for the Oakland A's. Mark McGwire and Jose Canseco of the juicing era, the Moneyball era, Eric Chavez and Barry Zito and Tim Hudson, etc. You mentioned Reggie Jackson, Bert Campanera should be on that list. But I think Rickey is the guy for this franchise. And my thought first went to just like how sad I am for Oakland A's fans that they lose a guy like this.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a real double whammy to lose the franchise and then lose the franchise icon. And the field at the Coliseum is named for Rickey Henderson. It's Rickey Henderson Field. And he was last seen in public on Rickey Henderson Field just a couple months ago, looking hale and hearty and like his usual trim self, as if he could just step right back into a uniform. And he and other A's greats were there to say farewell. And the Coliseum is not going anywhere, and there will still be sports played there, but it is just an extra sad addendum to everything that we've discussed about the A's this year that Rickey has left Oakland just as the A's have. But there are great memories and there are great highlights, and there's the Bill James line about how if you split Rickey Henderson in two, you would have had two Hall of Famers. It is absolutely true. And it's funny that he is so associated with the A's because, of course, he played everywhere. He played for 9 teams, and especially later in his career, he entered a journeyman phase and he would play wherever would have him, including the San Diego Surf Dogs of the upstart Golden Baseball League when he was in his mid-40s in 2005. So have bat will travel. That was the case with Rickey, but very often he traveled to Oakland or back to Oakland, and he certainly had most of his playing time there and a lot of his best playing time, and really was embraced there more so than he was even in New York, where, say, Don Mattingly was around and already sort of had fans' hearts. He was the guy in Oakland, and he absolutely deserved it.
He was a guy for a lot of baseball fans. Sad to lose him, but kind of a joy to go back through Rickey Henderson's career in the course of memorializing him this week. Up next, the NCAA women's volleyball tournament wrapped over the weekend. I watched it. Maybe you did too. It was a real doozy, and we will talk about it. This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game, shifting a little money here, a little money there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too. You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help you find options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states. This holiday season, don't forget your number one fan, you. So what's a gift you could use? Maybe go to more home games, or even travel to some away games while rocking a new away team jersey. Well, here's something for you. Discover automatically doubles all the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cashback Match. With Discover, you could turn $150 cash back into $300. That'll help with the swanky away jersey. It pays to Discover. See terms at discover.com/creditcard. Welcome back to Hang Up and Listen. Alex Kirshner still here with Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs. Women's volleyball has been on a real heater lately. TV ratings have been very good, an obligatory part of this kind of discussion. The semifinals of this NCAA tournament at the end of last week averaged more than 1 million viewers on ESPN, setting a new record, keeping up a trend of these numbers mostly just going up, up, and up for the better part of the past few years. Tickets were hard to come by and very expensive for the Final Four, held in Louisville, a setting that really played to the advantage of the University of Louisville, which made it all the way there, actually, to the final. Volleyball has always been, I think, a huge draw at select schools. I certainly wouldn't pretend in front of a Nebraska fan that this is an entirely new thing. But nationally, we do see tangible excitement around volleyball right now in a way that looks fresh and different. I'm from Pittsburgh, and Pitt volleyball has been one of the best tickets in town for years. I personally hated watching Pitt fall apart in the third and fourth sets to lose to Louisville on Thursday. And then on Sunday night in the national final, Penn State capped it all off by beating that same Louisville squad to win the 8th national title in program history. Lindsay, this was fun. Is volleyball a rocket ship?
It is a very, very high-functioning rocket ship.
Good point.
We have to be specific these days when talking about rocket ships. It can be a divisive descriptor. But look, volleyball has been on the rise over this past decade, and goodness, did this championship weekend deliver on all fronts. Want to give special shout out to Penn State coach Katie Schumacher-Cawley, who became the first woman coach to win the NCAA Division I volleyball title. She did it 25 years after leading Penn State to the championship as a player. And she did it while battling cancer. In September, she was diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer at the young age of 44. And she stayed coaching through chemotherapy and never missed a practice, never missed a game, and, coached with her cap on her head. And it was just quite a moving moment to see all the players really rally for her. They did it all in front of a record 21,860 fans at a stadium that I hate to name, the KFC Yum Center in Louisville. It's got an exclamation point in the title.
That's right.
I was wondering which of us was going to venture to say that in this segment. So thanks for jumping on that grenade.
It's so bad you have to say it. It's just so bad. It just can't be just KFC. It has to be the Yum exclamation point center. But that's a record amount of fans, and the atmosphere was incredible. The second set of that game, Penn State was clearly the best team. Anna DeBeer, Louisville's star player, rolled her ankle in the semis and couldn't play in the final. So that put Louisville at a disadvantage. But in the second set, Louisville saved 10 set points to win 34-32. And I don't know, I'll probably go back and watch the end of that set multiple times. It was just remarkable. But, it's part of a bigger picture this weekend, which really showcased the parity of the sport. I mean, all 4 number 1 seeds did make it to the Final Four, but there were upsets in both semifinals. It seemed like Pitt and Nebraska were on a collision course. Pitt was the best team all year, and Nebraska avenging their loss in the national championship game last year. Harper Murray is one of the biggest stars of the sport. But Penn State came back from a 2-0 deficit to get a reverse sweep against Nebraska in the semis, saving 2 match points along the way. So, just an absolutely remarkable weekend. But a couple numbers, and then I'll stop talking for a minute. But we don't have the ratings yet for this championship game because it was just yesterday. But last year's championship match had 1.7 million viewers on ABC. I'm guessing this one's going to be the same or more. And the selection show got 268,000 viewers. And the regular season games across ESPN platforms averaged 140,000 viewers. These are big numbers. They're not college football numbers, but these are big numbers. And I think just goes to show really how healthy the sport is on the collegiate level. And we can talk about seeing if that's going to transfer to the pros.
One thing I wanted to ask you, Lindsay, this might be a broad question, but you mentioned that Katie Schumacher-Cawley was the first woman head coach to win in NCAA Division I volleyball, and this was the first matchup of 2 female head coaches in a final, because Danny Busboom-Kelly is the head coach of Louisville. And that sort of surprised me, and also surprised me slightly that 18 of the 20 winningest coaches in Division I women's volleyball history are men. What factors determined the gender makeup of head coaches in women's sports? Because it seems like there's quite a variation depending on which sport and which level we're discussing.
Well, Ben, that's a great question. So Title IX, obviously very good for women's athletics. But what happened was before Title IX, women's sports were... The administrators were women, the coaches were women, everyone was women. When the NCAA took over women's sports and Title IX happened, money started coming into the sport, and men who run athletic departments started being in charge of all women's sports. And guess who men hire, Ben? Men hire men to lead. And so, a lot of it is that these are long-standing coaches. There's not as much coaching turnover in women's sports historically because there's not as much pressure from administrations to win, right? That is changing. There is pressure now, but, in a lot of these elite programs, it is men who were hired to lead the program and who've gotten decades to build up these programs. As they're starting to retire and step down, you're seeing more women now take their spot. But it's ultimately because men started making the hiring decisions in college sports, and that led to decades of men being the ones. And it just becomes a snowball effect, right? All of a sudden, who has coaching experience?
Yeah.
Well, only the men, because they're the only ones who have been hired for the past 20 years. So there has been a big push. I've covered this extensively in college basketball, which has gone, diversified a lot in the past few years. But it's an ongoing thing. And, I think everyone agrees that it's great for, ideally, you want the best candidate and you want men and women. And you especially want people of color and Black people who are way underrepresented in the coaching ranks to get a chance. But ultimately, since all men's coaching jobs are going to men, when over half of the women's coaching jobs go to men as well, it becomes a real problem. So this was exciting to see. But yeah, I'm just absolutely thrilled at the progress that volleyball is starting to make. And as we get more leagues and more pro opportunities, that's going to, expand the job pool, hopefully more as these ratings continue to rise. I mean, the Big Ten Network has seen a really great investment on showing their women's volleyball games. So hopefully, as these programs start to grow, more investment, more attention, we're going to get more women hired.
Yeah,
we'll
we've
see.
talked about that, I guess, with the WNBA and NBA. And is it seen as one job is more desirable than another in a certain league, and how that has changed? And I guess Shoemaker-Colley's predecessor, Russ Rose, was leading the Lions for 43 years. So that's a pretty good example of what you're talking about.
Proves my point, I think.
Yeah. Won a lot of games, 7 national championships, but yeah, not a ton of turnover there.
I think volleyball has one great advantage that we talk about in a lot of sports right now, which is that these games are a breeze. The matches are a breeze, I should say. They don't take very long. They're extremely watchable. There's a lot of emotion involved. You can really see the emotion on the players' faces. It's a great show. And I enjoy the sport. I think it's a fast-paced game. I think the anticipation when a ball is set up in the air to be spiked is quite something and is a different sensation than you find in a lot of sports. It sort of resembles the deep ball being up in the air in football while you're just waiting for the big thing to happen. It's just really, really watchable in a way that, frankly, most sports are not. It's kind of bite-sized. Like, a lot of these games take less than an hour. Pretty good stuff. And in an era where every sports league is hand-wringing over how we can make our games shorter and appeal to people with limited attention spans, volleyball might have cracked the code.
Well, and if you do get a long match, it's because it's an exciting one, right? It's because someone has pushed it to go longer. It's not necessarily, well, there's some reviews that are coming in, but, it's not because it was a defensive slog or, we got caught up in the review system or there were too many commercials or, you had one inning go 45 minutes.
Yeah, no, as a non-volleyball expert, I definitely felt that tuning in that, yeah, you're not going to be up on all of the storylines and the history and the players, but just in terms of moment-to-moment comprehensibility. So do I understand what I'm watching? Do I know that was good? Why was that good? Sometimes these things we kind of take for granted if we've been watching a sport our entire lives. The complexities of them don't always translate immediately to someone who's tuning in for the first time. But I think most people have probably at least dabbled in volleyball, playing at some level, even if, like me, it was in an indoor gym in high school. There's probably at least some basic understanding of what the goal of the game is. And then it's just fun to watch. And there's some built-in suspense, and you've got these long exchanges, and you can anticipate, oh, here comes the big spike. And it's just kind of fun to watch in a very, watch the ball go back and forth kind of very simple lizard brain way. So I do appreciate that. And Lindsay, obviously, it's a kind of a common theme of a lot of our segments and discussions this year about various women's sports exploding in popularity. And one week we're talking about the W, and another week we're talking about NWSL, and another week something else. Where do you see volleyball fitting into that trend? Is this sort of toward the top of the leagues and levels that have been able to capitalize on this wave of enthusiasm and then turn it into eyeballs and potentially revenue down the road? And is there ever a point at which there's kind of a cannibalization that goes along here? Like there have to be winners and losers, and some leagues ascend and others don't. Does it have to be sort of a zero-sum game, or is there still so much pent-up growth that is latent here that everyone can keep getting larger pieces of the pie because the pie itself is expanding?
Well, here's the biggest thing that volleyball has going for it is that it is the top sport for young girls right now. And I've talked to many a WNBA coach lamenting how much basketball is losing talent to volleyball because, well, the WNBA coaches that I've talked to say it's because volleyball is easier. And so it's just easier to pick up. And so a lot of the players go to that. It's not as physical, although I don't know, watching them dive around the court. But anyways, that's the snobbery basketball. Everyone's defensive of their own sport, and that results in them being negative towards other sports. But it's true that there's an explosion, and that I think there's so much money in the youth game right now. I mean, there are these tournaments and these conferences that take over cities. The upside and the downside is that there is no men's professional successful model in the United States to follow. Men's volleyball is not as big in the United States. Of course, overseas, there are plenty of successful leagues for men and women. But I think that both gives volleyball a lot of ways to be creative, but it also, I think, makes coverage from a media standpoint harder because we're in a copycat business, right? Like you do what you're familiar with. Right now, there are 3 professional opportunities in the United States for women's volleyball players, which is huge uptick over 0 in the last decade. So one is Athletes Unlimited, which is just a 5-week program, one site. Athletes Unlimited does multiple sports. It's a in real life fantasy version where you switch teams every week. So that's been great for the sport. But last year, the Pro Volleyball Federation launched PVF, and that's a very standard franchise model that we're familiar with in American sports. They have a college draft. They had 7 teams their first season. They'll have 8 this year. They're going to start in January. 28 games, all either road or home, one-off games in their local markets. This year, they had a media rights deal with CBS Sports Network last year. This year, they extended that deal with CBS. Fans will see 20 matches on CBS Sports Network. They're going to have an all-star game, their first ever all-star game, which will be live on CBS. They've also got a deal now with Fox Sports 1 and Fox Sports 2 to show some more games nationally. All the games are available on YouTube and really easy to stream, really good quality. And the minimum salary last year was $60,000, and some players earning as much as $125,000 for a 22-game season. It's going to be 28-game season this year. So I got to go to one match in Atlanta and see the Atlanta Vibe, and it was a blast. I had such a great time. I think their average attendance was around 5,000 people, which it's a start, right? But you've now got a competitor, League One Volleyball. LOVB is how they abbreviate that, and they want you to call it love. So I don't really want to do that, but or you can say love.
Okay, yeah, pass.
But anyways, they have a big deal with ESPN, and they are big on the youth level. So they have the largest club community / youth development in the United States. They've bought up a lot of local club teams and started a lot of club teams since 2020. They've raised $160 million, including a recent $100 million round of fundraising that had a lot of, big names such as the Lindsey Vonn and big NBA players. So they're going to launch on January 8th. They have 6 teams: Atlanta, Houston, Salt Lake City, Austin, Texas, Wisconsin, and Omaha. Atlanta and Omaha are the 2 doubles. So they're going to have teams from both. Their structure is a little confusing. They're going to kind of do tournaments, and they're all based. So sometimes you'll have 2 teams playing in a city where neither one of them are based. But I think the fact that they can really, once again, draw directly from this really lucrative youth volleyball scene, and they already have a deal with ESPN to carry 28 of their matches, only 10 on linear television, ESPN2 and ESPNU. But it seems like their minimum salary is also $60,000, and bonuses can be earned. Transportation and housing costs are covered. Year-round health and dental insurance. It's going to be really interesting to see 2 professional volleyball leagues competing at the same time. If you look at the history of any professional sport, there's usually 2 at the beginning. There's always some competition, and I'm really curious to watch this year. So when these games are going to be on television that you can watch, hopefully everyone will turn in, and we're just going to kind of see what happens and what develops next.
Up next, the Tampa Bay Rays Christmas present is a bunch of public bonds. Will the people giving them this gift see a return on their investment? We'll find out. GiveWell, a nonprofit that researches and recommends giving opportunities, is committed to maximizing the impact of donations. Each recommendation is grounded in months of rigorous research and transparency to ensure your contribution has the greatest possible impact on the world. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 125,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. If you've never used GiveWell to donate, you can have your donation matched up to $100 before the end of the year, or as long as matching funds last. To claim your match, go to givewell.org and pick podcast and enter Hang Up and Listen at checkout. Make sure they know that you heard about GiveWell from Hang Up and Listen to get your donation matched. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. You chose to hit play on this podcast today? Smart choice. Progressive loves to help people make smart choices. And that's why they offer a tool called Auto Quote Explorer that allows you to compare your Progressive car insurance quote with rates from other companies. So you can save time on the research and can enjoy savings when you choose the best rate for you. Give it a try after this episode at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Not available in all states and situations. Prices vary based on how you buy.
This episode is brought to you by Bleacher Report. How do you follow sports? From college football to the NBA, Bleacher Report brings you the latest news, live scores, and epic highlights from your favorite leagues, teams, and athletes, all in one app. Dive into exclusive shows hosted by your favorite athletes and original Bleacher Report series with breaking news, rumors, and predictions all season long. Download Bleacher Report to personalize your coverage.
With my friends Lindsay Gibbs and Ben Lindbergh, I'm Alex Kirshner, still with you here on Hang Up. The Tampa Bay Rays have been trying for many years to get taxpayers in Pinellas County, Florida, to help them one way or another with the construction of a new stadium. Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg is an ugly, charmless venue that is well behind the times of most major league parks, and from the team's standpoint, it is not an ideal cash cow flush with modern amenities. This issue probably gained more urgency recently when Hurricane Milton rolled through the area and shredded the Trop's roof, something that will cost tens of millions of dollars to fix, and something that's not happening as of yet as the Rays and the local government mull their options. This year, the Rays are going to play their games in the Yankees spring training park. That will, yes, by the way, make 2 major league teams playing in minor league parks this year. The Athletics will be doing that in Sacramento as well, for whatever reason. Back in October, the county commission in Pinellas moved to delay issuing more than $300 million in bonds to benefit a Rays stadium. And it decided that way again in November, but then steeled itself this month, December, opting to issue those bonds after all to help a Rays stadium. You would think the team would be happy about this, what with them benefiting from at least hundreds of millions of dollars in public money plus tax breaks, but you would be wrong. Rays team president Matt Silverman said in a statement, quote, "As we have made clear, the county's delay has caused the ballpark's completion to slide into 2029. As a result, the cost of the project has increased significantly, and we cannot absorb this increase alone. When the county and city wish to engage, we remain ready to solve this funding gap together." The audacity, the unmitigated gall, the temerity of this. Ben, why is the government being so rude to the Rays?
Just a bunch of Scrooges, really. A mere $1 billion in public cash tax breaks and land discounts. This is just a pittance. The poor Rays. It really is something, the attitude the team has taken here. And I will say the Rays started out with my sympathy in this situation, which is not normally something I say about a team that is trying to get public funds for a ballpark development project. I sort of start from the default of this never really works out for the taxpayers and people should pay for their own stadiums if they're billionaires. But in this case, you did have an act of God, quote unquote. You had hurricanes, you had the trop, the roof getting shredded. The entire park is in disarray. It can't be fixed in time for 2025. And thus the Rays are being forced to play in a minor league park of a division rival, no less. What an indignity. And so I did feel a little bit bad for them. This was not their doing. They were forced into this disadvantageous situation. And yet, they have done their best to squander whatever sympathy I felt for them since then, because they've acted extremely entitled. No apparent awareness or concession or tone that says that we understand that maybe this is not the only priority for the county here, that we've gone through a natural disaster, that many people have lost lives, have lost homes, that we are still rebuilding this area, and that possibly a $1 billion handout to a billionaire should not be at the top of anyone's priority list. And they have acted as if they don't get exactly what they want when they want it, it's just a great affront to them. And they're being done some sort of wrong here by these county commissions that are involved in this. And really, it's not as if the commissions have even gone against what they agreed to do or anything. When they made this agreement that the Rays agreed to, there was an understanding that the bonds could be issued anytime up until next March, I believe. And so they weren't close to that deadline, but just because the vote was delayed a couple times, the can was kicked down the road, the Rays acted as if, oh, okay, you don't want us then? Well, we're going to take our business elsewhere. And really, it seems almost as if they are attempting to scuttle this deal. And we can talk about whether that's true and what the motivations for that would be. But to suggest that a slight delay in the vote to issue the bonds is going to cost hundreds of millions of dollars in overruns and lead to the ballpark not being able to open for an entire additional year, it just doesn't really pass the sniff test for me. And so you start to wonder, are they trying to get out of this deal or of this area entirely?
It's very dramatic. I don't understand it all. This is wild. This is wild. Not to be all me, but I just cover so many women's teams in so many fights to get any access to stadiums at all. Literally just checked Blue Sky and saw a report about this deal for a National Women's Soccer League team where they're sharing the field now with the Boston public schools in 2026, and there are all these rules and restrictions around things. And I'm just thinking about how little access that women's teams get to public funds and to, support and what is financial aid? What is handouts? I don't know why we don't call these things handouts like they should be, right? Like charity almost from the city. And to see it just be shunned and to be looked down on and to be these owners are acting insulted by this $1 billion. This is wild. It just seems baseball gets into these situations very often, Ben.
Yeah, there are a lot of boondoggles, it is true, in baseball. Not exclusive to baseball, but in this case, now it could be just a game of chicken here, and we know how the Rays operate when it comes to their major league payroll. They're always cheap. Now they are often successful. They've made it work. They are basically the new A's when it comes to moneyballing and building teams that are contenders on low budgets. And we've seen that again this offseason. Anytime a player starts to hit their arbitration years, let alone free agency, starts to get expensive, they essentially recycle their roster and they ship him out to someone else and they start all over again with some new cost-controlled youngster. And they've made that model work. And maybe what they're trying to do here is just put the screws to these local politicians and try to extract every last dollar that they can. But there's also some speculation that they actually want out of this thing at this point, that the grass is greener. And they do have a history of looking elsewhere because the Rays, they have a pretty strong TV audience historically, but they have never drawn very well. And that's partly because of the facility, the Trop. There are some people who think that the Trop is charming. I would say they're not most people, probably. And so it's largely the location of the park, though, that is often blamed for their lack of attendance. And so when they got their new ballpark deal this past July, and it seemed like, okay, finally settled, their future is assured, there were still some people who wondered, well, the location isn't actually better here. So it seemed like kind of the root problem of their attendance at the Trop wouldn't really be that much improved by this new ballpark. And so they have looked in the past to Montreal and other places and said, well, maybe we could do a timeshare and we could split half and half in this city and that city, which just always seemed pretty preposterous, but they were exploring it for a few years. And there's this cheap land development provision in this deal that basically if the Rays walk away from this arrangement, they don't get that. But if the commission tells them to take a walk, then they get to keep that and also explore options in other cities, which they can't do while this deal is at least still theoretically alive. So there's some speculation that maybe this is sort of like when you want to end a relationship, but you don't want to be the one to issue the breakup edict, and you sort of want to just act so nasty that they break up with you. That could be what's happening here, but there's just a lot of uncertainty long term about this franchise. You know, maybe this all works out and they end up back at the Trop at, say, 2026 and the roof gets repaired. And then they enter this new ballpark a couple of years after that and it all ends happily ever after. But right now, things are about as up in the air as they are for the A's, if not more so. And that's not great news for baseball because it has been looked at for quite a while as we got to figure out the A's and Rays situation before we can move on to expansion. And Rob Manfred has consistently said that they're overdue for expansion. It's been a really long time, the longest time since expansion started in MLB. And they kind of have to get these two teams settled, if only because they need the leverage of being able to say, we can move to Nashville, we can move to Portland, we can move to Montreal in order to extract this public funding. And so they have to get...
You're forgetting somewhere, Ben.
Sorry.
Charlotte or Raleigh.
Of course.
I think they're both,
always...
they both want one.
Or Raleigh, yep. Often mentioned. So in this case, they sent in Rob Manfred to kind of close the deal here, who's not necessarily looked at as a great diplomat or a persuader of people, but they did send him up to shore support for this deal. And in the short term, at least, that seemed to work, that he made some assurances that, no, the Rays actually want to remain in this area. But the Rays themselves are just not really sending that signal.
Heartwarming story where a baseball team gets to draw on the tremendous credit rating of the local taxpayers, get hundreds of millions of dollars in bonds, like $1 billion in total value. I saw that in Field of Schemes, given the land discounts and the tax breaks that they're getting. Mm-hmm. And that's not good enough. It's just heartwarming. But I guess we all want what we want at this holiday season. Goodness gracious.
Yeah. And you, in the short term, have the situation where you have two teams, two of your American League teams are playing in minor league parks, which in this case, okay, you can't really blame the Rays for that for 2025. They were put in a bad spot. In the A's case, you very much can blame them. And we have on earlier episodes of this podcast, but you can see that there's a premium that comes along with that when it comes to enticing players to play in Bush League ballparks. These are supposed to be big leaguers. And so the A's have actually been spending some money this offseason because they have to avoid a grievance from the Players Association because they're a revenue sharing recipient and they've been spending so little of the money that they've gotten. So they've actually been handing out some deals, but they've had to pay above market deals to sign, say, starting pitcher Luis Severino, who signed for a lot more than he was expected to. That could be the Sacramento premium. And maybe that comes into play with the Rays as well, especially if this ends up being more than a single season arrangement.
I just want to give a on-brand shout out to State Rep Ava Dina Delgado, a Democrat in Chicago, because, I'm really an expert on local Illinois politics. But she has introduced legislation requiring equity in public stadium funding for men's and women's sports. She is looking at the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority, a state entity that constructs and renovates sports stadiums. And all she wants is for the WNBA and NWSL team, the Chicago Stars and the Chicago Sky, to be able to use the Illinois Sports Facilities Authority and have access to that. The Democratic governor said this is probably going nowhere because, of course, everyone's against public funds for stadiums. I don't know if you've heard when women's teams are involved. This is a non-starter. But I really want to give credit to Delgado for bringing up this issue. It's something politically I had never thought of. And I just thought this segment was a good time to mention it as we're talking about $1 billion being being scoffed at.
Yeah, if we're bilking the taxpayers, might as well be equal opportunity bilking. Everyone gets a cut. That's only fair. And also, I'll just say, if you're not a Rays fan, but if you're a Yankees hater, and there are probably many more Yankees haters than there are Rays fans, one thing you could root for because of this arrangement is there's some possibility that the Rays could win a World Series playing in George M. Steinbrenner Field, the home park of a Yankees minor league affiliate. There could be playoff games here. The Yankees might have to go to one of their minor league parks to play the A's and potentially lose in their own spring training facility. So that is one potentially hilarious outcome of this if you are someone who roots against the Yankees, as many people are.
To play the Rays in their own spring training ballpark.
Yeah.
Incredible. Yep. Ben, Lindsay, may I grace us with an Afterball this week?
Please.
It's a baseball-heavy show. Rickey Henderson was intentionally walked, and this is just the wind-up. It's another baseball term. Rickey Henderson was intentionally walked 61 times in his illustrious Major League career. Now, that may sound ridiculous. Why would you put Rickey Henderson on base? But fear not that in 60 of those 61 intentional walks, there was already a runner on first or second base. You were not actually giving Rickey Henderson a chance to steal a bag by putting him on first base for free. But indeed, on the 61st attempt, on September 11, 1991, it was the bottom of the 10th inning in a tied 5-5 game between the Chicago White Sox and Henderson's A's. And in this at-bat, relief pitcher Scott Radinsky did indeed intentionally walk Rickey Henderson with first base open and with second base open. It made some sense because the winning run was already on third base. So even in this case where you think, why would someone put Rickey Henderson on base? It was in a spot where stealing second would not be particularly valuable for Rickey Henderson. And yet there's a reason we bring it up. Because after Rickey Henderson was deposited onto first base by the White Sox, the craziest thing happened. He was pinch run for by a man by the name of Brad Comiskey, who bounced around the majors for 8 seasons. That is right. Pinch running in extra innings for Rickey Henderson. Must have been a little sore that day. As Ben talked about, he liked to take some days off. Anyway, on the very next at bat, Jose Canseco hit a walk-off sacrifice fly. So there is one lesson here, which is that Jose Canseco, with a double play in order, was actually considered a more optimal guy to face than Rickey Henderson. You would rather take your chances with mega juicing poster child of the steroid era, Jose Canseco, than you would in a tied bottom of the 10th inning with Rickey Henderson in 1991. A second lesson here is that even the greatest of all time can sometimes use a little bit of rest, as Rickey did that day when he was then lifted for a pinch runner. I'd like to share with you both my Brad comics of the day, my pinch runner when I'm looking to give my guys a little rest.
Yeah, by the way, Rickey, of course, clean as far as we know, fairly clean off the field, but also when it comes to what he took or didn't take. And one great quote from him is, "My God, could you imagine Rickey on roids? Oh, baby, look out." Almost wish we had seen it, but he was pretty great as it was. Scott Radinsky, the pitcher you mentioned there, he is not just a baseball pitcher, he is also a punk rock singer of multiple bands, including Pulley. And I guess this is a pretty punk rock move, even given the situation, to walk Rickey with a base open ahead of him. But he's not the name of our Afterball today. It's Brad Cominsk. So, Alex, what is your Brad Cominsk?
My Brad Cominsk is the situation with the college football playoff this weekend. Notre Dame 27, Indiana 17, but it really wasn't that close if you watch the game. Penn State 38, SMU 10, Texas 38, Clemson 24, Ohio State 42, Tennessee 17. The 4 first-round games in this first year of the college football playoff were cool in exactly one way, which is that they were held on campuses instead of at bowl sites, and the crowds were great, a true showcase of the pageantry that makes the sport something special. Things got a lot more boring, unfortunately, once toe actually met leather. 3 games were total blowouts. Only one, the Clemson-Texas game, was sort of close. It was a 1-score game for a brief moment in the fourth quarter. This has prompted lots of hand-wringing about not just the team selections and the inclusion of teams like Indiana and SMU, but the format itself. You have people both saying, you should have put Alabama in, and you have lots of people saying, why does the sport even have a 12-team playoff in the first place? This is too many teams. And look, the sport does not necessarily need a 12-team playoff. There's no reason why 12 has to be the exact number. But if you are looking for a college football postseason, or indeed any version of college football at all, that is not very lopsided, you are going to be looking for a long time. You should probably not be a fan of this sport. There have been this season 884 college football games involving teams from the Football Bowl subdivision, the top classification of more than 130 teams. 126 of those, that's 14%, have been decided by a margin within a field goal. 35% have come down to one possession, 8 points or fewer. Still less than half, 41%, have been decided by 10 points or fewer. The average margin of scoring nationally in a college football game, 18.4 points. What about just games featuring the power conference teams and Notre Dame? 336 of those so far, 17% within a field goal, 42% within one score, 49%, still not even half, within 10 points, even when you have theoretically like teams facing each other. And heck, what if we got even more granular? What if we took the 30 college football playoff games played between 2014 and 2023 when the event was only 4 teams? Well, 10 of those 30 were decided by within one score. 18 of the 30 were decided by 17 points or more, and 13 of the 30 by 3 touchdowns or more. What about the BCS championship game from 2006 to 2013? 2 of those decided by a field goal, 5 of the 8 by 2 touchdowns or more. Similar blowouts in the pre-championship era of the BCS that began in 1998. That's okay. It is, of course, this very trend towards blowouts that makes college football games extra fun when they are not blowouts. Whether that is Vince Young going to the pylon to beat USC for the national championship at the Rose Bowl, or whether that is Vanderbilt finally beating Alabama after losing 23 games in a row to them this year, including the last 3 by about 155-3 as a margin. This is a sport that is built on blowouts, and it is that tradition of teams getting absolutely annihilated that makes it cool when they do not, when there are surprises, when there is suspense. Even when there is a near upset, like Georgia Tech taking Georgia to 8 overtimes in the last week of the regular season this year. Why was that interesting? Well, it was 8 overtimes, but it was particularly interesting because everyone thought, or most thought, though there were some angsty Georgia fans, that Georgia Tech was going to get waxed in that game and that it would not be competitive. This is the treat that culture of blowouts has long given us. It is why it is cool when Appalachian State beats Michigan in week 1 in 2007, and it is why it is cool anytime that any big dramatic upset ever happens in the sport. It is explicitly because there is no parity here, and this is not a sport where you would expect it to happen. Make peace with that, and you will be less surprised the next time there is a first round of the playoff with 4 lopsided games, and you will have more fun watching the games that are actually competitive. You will savor them more if you can remember that the status quo in this sport is that someone, pretty much always, is getting their ass kicked.
I love that the defense here is, these games were bad, but actually most games are bad. So it's not the format that's a problem. It's the sport itself. You're not wrong.
Yeah. You might not like the format, and that's fine. God didn't come down from the heavens and say that it has to be 12 teams. But if you want a postseason system in college football where there are not blowouts, then what you're saying is you don't want college football. It just is the way that it is.
Yeah, it's like saying you don't want upsets in the baseball playoffs. Good luck with that.
I'd say one of my family groups was celebrating Christmas all day on the 21st. So this worked out really well for me because I was a little anxious about missing all of the games and having to cram to prep for this. And you know what? It was fine.
Thank you very much for that segment, by the way, to Stathead, who's play finder at baseballreference.com and college football event finder. Were quite important to both our Rickey Henderson intentional walk trivia and also the index of college football games that have been played this year. That is all for this episode. We also have a bonus episode that is live right now about the Travis Kelce, Taylor Swift Hallmark movie industrial complex. It is really something that must be seen to be believed. And guess what? We have seen it, so we believe it. To hear that, you can subscribe to Slate Plus on Apple Podcasts by clicking Try Free at the top of our show page, or visit slate.com/hangup+ to get access wherever you listen. The episode is available right now, and we will see you over there. Our show notes are at slate.com/hangup, and you can email us at hangup@slate.com. Don't forget to follow the show and rate and review us on Apple Podcasts. Our producer this week is Alyssa Jong Perry. For Ben Lindbergh and Lindsay Gibbs, I am Alex Kirshner. Remember Zelmo Beatty, and thank you for listening.
When it's PCS time, you know the drill. Pack, research the new base, get the kids in school, because family supports family. At American Public University, we support military families with flexible, affordable online education that moves with you. As a military spouse, your tuition rate is the same as your partner's, just $250 per credit hour. American Public University, education that moves with you. Learn more at apu.apus.edu/military.
Hi, I'm Josh Levine. My podcast, The Queen, tells the story of Linda Taylor. She was a con artist, a kidnapper, and maybe even a murderer. She was also given the title the Welfare Queen, and her story was used by Ronald Reagan to justify slashing aid to the poor. Now, it's time to hear her real story. Over the course of 4 episodes, you'll find out what was done to Linda Taylor, what she did to others, and what was done in her name.
The great lesson of this, for me, is that people will come to their own conclusions based on what their prejudices are.
Subscribe to The Queen on Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening right now.